Welcome back. We're continuing with this series on borderline personality disorder children, looking specifically how parents can understand their children who are adolescents or young adults or even older. Um, uh, Everything that we've been talking about so far is really very much based on helping parents, but something absolutely needs to be stressed, and that is um, there are other children in the home, and those children must be considered and never neglected. Even when the needs of the borderline child seem overwhelming in terms of how much time you need to attend to their needs, how much emotional energy. There may be a lot of running around because you have to go to school frequently or the camp because the child repeatedly gets into trouble, and so on. And so I want to talk about that for a few minutes today. The first thing is there's this great scene in Fiddler on the Roof, one of my favorite movies, where the child is going to marry someone who the father is very unhappy with, and the context doesn't matter, but it's extremely upsetting to the father, who's very religious, and the mother, who's very religious, and they're very conservative and cultural in their customs. And he says at some point to his wife, he says, "We have other children." And by that he means that he's extremely disappointed with this daughter who is going off in the wrong direction. But the reality is that although they're concerned for her, they have two or three other young daughters and I think two older daughters. Similarly with borderline children, never forget you have other children and their needs are no less important. And I know that there are times, as I said before, when you become very um, emotionally preoccupied and your thoughts are preoccupied and your energy and time are taken up with the borderline child who may seem to have endless needy issues and multiple issues, separation anxiety and tantrums and academic problems and social problems, and they need medications, they need to be taken to therapists and doctors, and they have irritable bowel syndrome, they say they have headaches, they can't get up in the morning to go to school, multiple issues that are serious. Don't neglect the other children. In fact, try to be proactive, setting aside time for the other children, whether it's one child or several child, because they also need to grow and develop in a safe and healthy way. At the same time, you should also have integrative family events, going to movies or whatnot, where everybody, including the borderline child, is included so that borderline child doesn't feel excluded. Just like you don't want the normal child in the family not to feel excluded because you're devoting so much time to the borderline. There are many issues that inform how we understand the healthy child, including birth order. For example, we know that birth order is very important in how we relate to children. The ages of the children are very important. Our own ages. It's one thing relating to your child when you have a child at the age of 18 versus 28 versus 38 versus 48 when you just have less energy. And you may be in a different place personally, but also financially and so on. Older people have their own challenges when they have children in their 40s, but they may be more economically stable, which makes the child actually feel much safer and more secure in their lives. Perhaps you're able to take more vacations or enjoy life more in terms of presence and so on. Jealousy between children at the best of times is normal and to be expected. But really, with homes in which there's a borderline child, you have to be particularly careful. First, you really have to be aware that jealousy runs both ways. That the non-borderline child may feel very jealous, either asserting to a parent or thinking in his or her own mind that the borderline child is getting a lot of attention. It goes the other way also. The borderline child may feel very jealous that the relationship between the non-borderline child and the parent is, for lack of a better word, normal. They interact in a normal way. They don't scream at each other. They give one another hugs and kisses when they come and go. They're supportive of one another, and so on. The borderline child will see how these relationships occur between the parent, first of all, between the parents as a dyad, and then between the parent and the different children, and they can use it in a positive way as a model. And that's another reason to maintain these positive and normal relationships with the normal children in the home, so that the borderline child can see what a healthy and normal relationship looks like. That the borderline child will understand that you don't have to scream and shout to get attention. The borderline child will have a better sense that you don't have to catastrophize and threaten you're going to kill yourself in order to be heard. The borderline child will learn that you don't get extra love and care from using drugs or doing dangerous impulsive behaviors, because the non-borderline child, who's going to school every day and interacting in a normal way with hobbies and activities and so on, is developing with a seemingly normal and happy and productive relationship with the mom or dad or both. Just like when we think about parent issues for borderline kids, we don't think in terms of a single parent. We think of whoever are the adult caretakers in the home, whether it's mom and dad or two moms, two dads, whatever it is. And as I've said in previous videos, now we have 50% or a little bit more than 50% of all children in the United States living in blended families. That is, children are growing up in families not with their biological mom and biological dad, but in homes in which there is a step parent or two step parents or step siblings or half siblings, or even extended family members serving as caretakers or peers or faux siblings. So it's not just the dynamic between the parents, it's the dynamic between these different children. And sometimes the children could be supportive of one another, the normal children, and sometimes they can't. Where they can't be supportive, it's usually because the children are not provided enough information about what's going on with the borderline child, so it's very secretive, right? There's a secret in the family. Or there are issues about the borderline child that can't be openly spoken about because it's embarrassing, either within the family or shameful outside of the family. Or the borderline child, when their issues are spoken about or discussed at all, the borderline child becomes enraged, right? They feel that part of them is being broken off from them. And what this results in is the sibling not really knowing what's going on. And it's particularly important because if you want, first of all, the siblings should have a healthy relationship as they grow and develop. But, there's going to be a point where the adolescent borderline is going to become a young adult and then an older adult, and you want the children to maintain a healthy bond with one another. Because of the difficulties in their childhoods, it's possible that, they may not have the closest relationship, but you want them to really be able to remain in contact with one another and generally be supportive and check in on one another, and to be able to maintain a semblance of care and consideration, because you have family and you don't have much else. And the reality is that the borderline, as she grows and develops into adulthood, may have very few supportive platonic relationships. She may have very few people in her life that she can speak to in an open and honest way about her, her negative issues, including whether it's depression, anxiety, or interpersonal conflicts in the workplace, or health issues or whatnot. And you want those kinds of support systems to remain in place, and you want them to remain strong. If there's a sense that the non-borderline child or children in the home are having difficulty, then it's very important to consider speaking openly with that child, and also making sure that the child has an opportunity to speak about what's going on in their heads with a school counselor, a private psychotherapist, um, really anybody that's going to allow the individual, that child, to feel heard. Not only heard within their own head so they can think through these issues if the child is healthy and mature, but to speak to a professional. Um, I love the medical model. I'm not a physician, but if you had a child who had a serious medical condition, um, you would inform the healthy children and say, look, this is what's going on. This is the name of the medical problem. These are the symptoms. You need to be aware that your sister may be in and out of the hospital at certain points during her childhood or teenage years. You need to tell the sibling, the healthy sibling, these are problems that hopefully they'll get better. We have really good doctors that we're working with, and they're really good medicines, but that, this may be a problem that your sister is going to have for the rest of her life. And you have to tell the healthy child not to be scared. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be concerned, but not to be scared every day because the child is going to be here. And we love the child and we're all part of the same family. Similarly, for children who have psychological or psychiatric issues, they need to be part of the family in the sense that the healthy children need to be told in an appropriate and a developmentally appropriate way what's going on with the borderline child, and maybe even have books to read about it at an appropriate age. And some of the stuff that goes on with borderlines, like especially adolescence, where there's acting out and temper tantrums and so on, it's almost you can almost reconstitute these issues in a humorous way. Talk about kind of how silly it is that someone who's 16 or 17 or 18 years old is acting that way. And I'm not saying completely laugh it off, but allow the family to sort of, integrate it in a healthy way into their family system. Because ultimately the borderline child is going to live under that roof for many, many years and perhaps into adulthood. And the siblings who live there need to be loved and cared for. And it's a family system dynamic. And by that I mean, whatever issues go on, it affects everybody in different ways given their ages and given their maturity levels. And it's dynamic in the sense that it's interactive and it's alive and very, very real. And sometimes you even get siblings who become, in some ways, co-parents. And I've seen this in families, and sometimes it can occur in a healthy way and sometimes in a not so healthy way. But you see this sometimes in single-parent homes where you have a child who is growing up and the mother, for example, is simply overwhelmed with a lot of physical responsibilities and maybe working long hours to make sure there's food on the table. And you have a borderline or a very difficult child in the home, and the healthy sibling really assists as a co-parent, maybe helping the other siblings with homework or with cooking and cleaning and all sorts of things, acting as a provider, even though the person may only be, an adolescent or even younger, but serving as someone who encourages the borderline sibling and makes sure that they're staying out of trouble and going to school and feeling good about themselves and talking, playing games and interacting. And it can be very helpful. And frankly, for that sibling, they're really going to grow up having a much more educated understanding about the borderline siblings' issues. You don't want the normal child to guess. You don't want that normal child to make assumptions. And you don't want that normal child to grow up with anger and resentment. It's a family and you're going to have to get along. And the best way to do that is through understanding each child's position within the home, understanding each child's needs, and the parent, frankly, understanding their own needs. And the honest to God truth is that if you have a borderline child who acts out all the time and is extremely difficult for many reasons that we've talked about given the criteria of borderline personality disorder in previous videos, you may have a lot of anger towards that child. You may have a lot of resentment. You may think, I wanted a normal family, and you're always acting out. You're always driving everybody crazy. You're always demanding. You're coercive or manipulative. You try to control things. You need to be in control of everything. You need a lot of doctor's appointments. It's very expensive to take care of you. You get kicked out of school. You get kicked out of camp. And the adult parent may then consciously or unconsciously veer their attention in a much more positive, loving way to the healthy child. And that's not good. It's not good for the parent. It's not good for the healthy child who may feel overwhelmed and smothered. And the borderline adolescent will pick up on that. And so these are not easy things to talk about. They're not easy things to do. I'm not suggesting that this is something that can be managed overnight, but it's something that develops in a healthy way with self-awareness, with psychoeducation, and it's ultimately a value system. And it allows for a healthier and safer family that's able to communicate, where roles are better understood, and hopefully it helps to augment the care and love that people feel for one another living under the same roof.